Hello again to all my friends and family, and I hope everyone's doing well today. It's Carpo here, and today I was sitting down to make a podcast actually about people, society, whether we're losing our minds, and something occurred to me as I was reading through my comments. I've had a few people mention what's going on with Kratom right now. And as a lot of folks know who watch my channel, I've been a Kratom advocate for about 10 years now. And my channel at one point was very focused on talking about Kratom. I had a secondary channel where I had to back up these things and move them to because YouTube decided to censor discussions about this back in 2016, 17, 18, right during the time when the FDA and the DEA were trying to schedule Kratom as a Schedule I substance in the same category as, well, I would say the harshest drugs, but that's not the case. In fact, amphetamines and cocaine, heroin are all in Schedule II, I believe, whereas Schedule I contains cannabis and psychedelics, the very substances that will not kill you. But that's another story altogether. They wanted to put Kratom into Schedule I. We fought it. The Kratom Association at that time was being born. There was this call to arms for people to send in letters to the FDA to tell them how we felt about it. And in one of the very unique circumstances, and unique in the case that it rarely happens, the people actually won. You know, the small voices out there who supported Kratom were enough to keep it out of Schedule I, and the government backed off for a while. But they never stepped back. They're continuously trying to push this. At the time, Scott Gottlieb was the head of the FDA. That guy's a real piece of work, let me just say. And eventually they started posting things like, well, Kratom is an opioid. We're just going to label it as an opioid because it acts similarly, even though it doesn't cause respiratory depression or the same addictive potential. And a lot of people who use it can abuse it. A lot of people who use it just use a small amount, just like coffee. But I'm not going to get into the details of how dangerous it is or is not. I think that this has been well discussed. I am going to talk about the current FDA attempt to get Kratom banned and whether or not it's an actual threat to Kratom advocates or users out there. Now, I could probably spend a half an hour talking about how Kratom helps to ease opioid withdrawal and dependence, the vast amount of overdose deaths we have, which any average year might be 65,000, which I believe in 2020 was near 100,000. It was in the 90,000s. We have a serious epidemic of opioid use in this country. Do I want to sit and blame the makers of OxyContin, Purdue Pharma, these other companies? Yeah, I do. But it's not going to do any good. Here we are. What do we do next? So, the FDA has sought to ban Kratom by using the DEA and these other agencies to make it look bad enough to classify it. Since the plan failed, they're trying to circumvent American law. Basically, knowing that the FDA is unable to get Kratom banned in this country, they opened up a public comment period, which is open until August 9th, allowing people to go and speak their mind about Kratom. Now, mind you, this is a 3-week window they gave, which all of the, scientists, experts, doctors, panels said that this is completely unacceptable to allow a 3-week comment period. But it does end on August 9th, and in September, they're going to have a meeting with World Health officials. Now, so in order to get around our own country's laws, they are going to the WHO, and they're trying to get a blanket global ban on Kratom, which would mean, I believe there's 56 countries that are members of this coalition. This is the same kind of bullshit that they pulled back in the old days with cannabis. Basically, the U.S. decided to ban cannabis in 1937. For those unaware, it was never intended to be something that would help the public, or it had nothing to do with public health. Anyone who's seen Reefer Madness is well aware that much of this was racially motivated, not to bring race into it, but there was a huge issue with blaming people for doing things they never did while smoking cannabis. But once the U.S. had banned cannabis, in order to get other countries to fall in line, we basically said this: Well, we're not going to let you do any trade with anybody else. We're not going to sell you anything, and we're not going to buy anything you have if you don't go along with our blanket ban. And many countries did. Before that, cannabis wasn't an issue in all these places. The U.S. has always been a dominator in that way, that if we want a rule in place, we have to have all the other countries abide by it. But this is a particularly unique case where we are in the modern day of 2021, where we have plenty of scientific evidence and literature and understandings of these drugs and how they act on the body, and can compare them to something like Kratom, which is much more benign, much less likely to cause problems. And I believe in the 6-year period that they monitored, Kratom users, they said that 22 people died in this country from Kratom use. But out of those 22 people, almost all of those were polydrug users, or there were other circumstances involved. To the people who actually died with only Kratom in their system, I believe there were only 2. Now you have to consider, with millions of people using this plant, the 2 people that died could have just as easily had a heart attack or something else. It's very difficult to just blame Kratom, but let's just say theoretically it did. That's 2 people. Compared to the 100,000 that are dying from overdoses every year, I don't think that there's really a comparison. And so, not to make this too long, I guess I just wanted to make it known, because I know some people look to me for advice on Kratom or what's going on with it, because I've been a Kratom vendor for 5-6 years, and before that I had been a Kratom advocate and user for 5 or 6 years. And the only reason I became a vendor was because I was so tired of the market being flooded with junk product. I wanted to provide something to my people. And my experience as a vendor has been just painful. PayPal terminated all Kratom vendors at one time. They seized my funds, which was like everything I had for my business. It was like $3,000, and they basically froze my account and held it for 6 months without a warning. And so a lot of Kratom vendors would try to work with credit card companies. For example, you would think you can get a credit processor. People who buy Kratom know, well, I can't usually use a Visa to buy it. Why not? Because the credit companies will not work with Kratom vendors. And the ones that do, the processors that do, it's considered a high-risk transaction. And they can charge you up to like 8 to 10% of every transaction for a fee, for liability. It's just a way for the credit card companies to get more money. And it makes it much more complicated for us. In fact, I've only received checks and money orders for payments for the last 4 years. And, my point here is that they tried to make it difficult for vendors in hopes that people would just give up and not sell it or not buy it. And that's just a ludicrous thought. That's almost as foolish as thinking people won't wake up and drink tea if they don't have coffee. People will find a way. I know a lot of folks over the last several years have come down on me hard for my support of Kratom. I've talked with people who have said Kratom is dangerous. It's caused me all these life problems. Some people have told me that they were taking, 50, 60, 80 grams a day. And I'd say, anything can be abused. There are people who come home every day and have 2 beers, watch a show and go to bed. There are people who sit at home and drink a case of beer a day. It doesn't mean that beer itself is bad, just like Kratom. And it's about a person's ability to consume something responsibly. And as adults, we should have that option. I am in full support of good labeling practices, of testing the product, of testing for metals, testing for purity, quality. I'm also in complete support of banning the sale for people under 18 years old. I mean, I can see Kratom being treated as tobacco, even though it's not remotely as harmful. I can imagine that would be a good way to go about it. Kids don't need to be taking these things. And yes, taking large amounts of it can give you a head change. But for those who think Kratom is something that just, is even remotely like heroin, it's ridiculous. I've heard people tell me that it is worse. I've had at least 2 people tell me Kratom addiction is worse than heroin and harder to kick. The thing I'd like to point out here is that everything is subjective. Mental addictions are strong, and our attachment to things can be strong. It's not always about the item. I mean, look at how hard it is for us to put down our cell phones. and they're not even in our bloodstream, right? So I'm hoping that in the long run here, this will just blow over as just another attempt by the FDA to tell people what they can and can't do. And even if you're not a Kratom advocate, even if you don't support it, you should definitely support people's rights to consume what they want as adults. There's just no way around that. It's the same way we can't ban fast food restaurants because people eat burgers every day and get fat. Even though that's a burden on the healthcare system, even though that's a burden on individual lives and people and children in the obesity epidemic, we just kind of, blow it off and say, oh, well, that's just people's choices. We can choose to eat, and that's right, and we can choose to consume what we want as well. There's a reason why after 80 years, cannabis finally became legal. Washington State, where I live, was the first state to make it legal to walk to the corner store for anyone to buy cannabis if they're 21 years old. Phenomenal. I know Colorado wants that claim to fame, but technically it was Washington and Colorado at the same time. But we're finally growing up as a society in some ways and saying, okay, adults should be able to have the right to do what they choose. But we're falling back into some very dark ages in another way. It's easy to see the light and still see the darkness. Or maybe it's like seeing the light at the end of the tunnel and then realizing it's just a segment and the tunnel keeps going. We have to consistently remain vigilant to defend our things, the things that we take and the things that we consume or hold dear to us for whatever reason. And as adults, we have that right. So I urge you to comment on the comment section for the FDA, even though, here's the kicker, they're not required to give that comment list to the WHO or the health authority when they actually try to schedule this. For those who might not know, as I said, on August 9th, they're going to end the comment period. In September, they're going to have a meeting about what to do globally, whether to ban it. However, that is not going to be the time when they schedule it. That will be when they listen to recommendations. This could be an ongoing thing that could last years, or by next year, maybe they could ban Kratom in several countries, but I'm guessing a lot of people are going to stand up and not put up with that. So just stand strong and, stand for what you believe and leave a comment if you're so able. Not here on my comment. You can leave a comment here, but go leave a comment on the FDA questionnaire page and raise some hell. Guess that's all I got. Thanks for listening. And if you need more information about Kratom, I'd love to say you can watch my other videos about them. I do have a few, but YouTube deleted probably a dozen of them, gave me strikes on my account for dangerous content, dangerous information, and I would not be surprised if they labeled this one for the same reason. Because of me talking about Kratom on my channel, I've been shadow banned by YouTube. My channel has not picked up subscribers in over a year and a half. I have basically remained, even if you search out specific titles of some of my videos, they will not pop up. That's what shadow banning is. It's basically, your video's up, but nobody can see it. So I just gave up talking about it. It's unfortunate. But I still try. And I do have a Kratom section on my Discord server, which is in the description, where I still talk about these things. And I have on my Patreon page, I have an entire list of private Kratom videos from YouTube that I had unlisted. That way I could just share them with people without having them be flagged by YouTube, even though they could technically still flag them even if they're private. But if you go to my Patreon page, for all my patrons, there's a link to the Kratom videos that I do have up, and I should probably make that publicly available as well. Maybe I'll do that. So thanks to all of you for listening, and let me know what you think. I'll talk to you next time.